when the sky is high. No reason to stay around. Pick your hands and you can touch and fly.
Hello and welcome to the Aviatrix Book Review. I'm Liz Booker. My guest today is a former U.S. Army Kiowa Warrior helicopter pilot and air mission commander who flew 2 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her memoir, Danger Close, My Epic Journey as a Combat Helicopter Pilot in Iraq and Afghanistan, is the Aviatrix Book Club discussion book for July 2021. Since leaving the Army, she has established herself as a national security, foreign policy, and military analyst, and frequently appears on television and radio. Her articles have been published in Forbes, The Washington Examiner, and Aviation Week, among others. You can find her at her website, officialambersmith.com, or on social media at AmberSmithUSA. Amber Smith, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you about your book and what you're doing now. For those who haven't maybe had a chance to read the book, would you mind telling us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. So my book, Danger Close, My Epic Journey as a Combat Helicopter Pilot in Iraq and Afghanistan, it really takes you through my journey of being a female helicopter pilot in the military, why I got interested in flying, how I grew up, and different things that sparked my interest in aviation and eventually led me to join the military and become a helicopter pilot. It takes you all the way through my training and then getting to my unit and moving on into combat in both Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's really a story of perseverance and growth and all about aviation, but really a broader story of my journey through the military.
Yeah, well, I just want to let you know that I have the opportunity to interview you at the end of the month after we've had all of our book discussions, and the response was overwhelming. Everybody really was riveted by the story. I certainly was, but even people who, have no helicopter experience or whatever, everyone loved it. So really,
that's amazing. Thank you so much.
No,
and to
really
all
great.
of you guys for reading it. That means a lot to me. I'm honored that you guys read it.
Well, we read it. So why did you publish it?
So I didn't, during my time in the military, I had zero plans whatsoever of writing a book. I actually did not like writing whatsoever, but thankfully things changed as things progressed. But I realized when I got out of the military that there were very few books out there about women who had served, especially in aviation. And so in the post 9/11 generation, and I wanted to tell my story, and I had some people who we worked in the same sort of circles, and they were like, you have to tell your story. It's, unique as a Kiowa pilot, a female who served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. That's pretty rare. And it absolutely was at the time. And I had never thought about it being rare or unique. It was just my job and what I did. And so when I got some of that feedback that there might be some interest in me telling my story, I thought more about it. And I sort of went back through my old emails and journals, and I was like, I think I could do this. Like, I want to write this. And it was hard for me at first because writing a memoir is like writing your diary and giving it to the world. So that was a little bit of a challenge for me at first, was putting myself out there, especially because of some adversity that I had faced and some hardships and struggles that I had to put out there. But I was like, if what I went through can help, some other people who may find themselves in similar circumstances, then I'm happy to do so.
I hear you. It's hard for me even to think about writing fiction, much less, I'm just sort of dabbling and starting to write little bits of stories from my military experience. And I'm only 2 years out of it. So I'm still sort of processing some of those experiences and figuring out what I want to do with them. But yeah, it's like the hardest thing you'll ever do is kind of open yourself up.
That is so true. When I started writing my story about 4 years after I left the military, and I needed that time to reflect back on my service. I don't think I could have written it any sooner. So I'm glad I had that time to reflect. But I tell so many people that have served that write down your story. Like, even if you are still in that stage where you're like, oh, I didn't do anything different, or nobody will be interested in my story, just write it down, because what you did do was different. Only less than 1% of the population is serving in the military at any given time. So a lot of people don't have those experiences and are interested in learning about them. And it also gives you, I always say that me writing my book myself gave me some closure to that chapter of my life that I didn't know that I was looking for. And so it was helpful in that aspect as well. So I'm a big advocate to write, whether you become a published author, whether it's just in your own notebook. I think it's good.
Yeah, I'll just pile onto that. You mentioned only 1% of the population is serving in the military, and then like we can break that way down to how many women are flying. And yeah, my big thing is
much smaller.
Yeah, much smaller. And my big thing is to encourage all the women in aviation to just start writing now, and then have that body of work later on to do something with, whether it's to write a memoir, to make yourself an example for the women coming behind you, or to use it in fiction, which I definitely plan to do. Yeah. So yeah, that's why, I try to talk to all the authors about writing, so that, anybody who's thinking about it or considering a road to publication, I'm sure, there's so much to learn that we'll talk about that later when we get to the writing part. But no, that's a great journey, and I'm glad that you did it, even if you waited until afterwards to make that decision. It's a great contribution to the canon to have your story out there. And you tell us so much in the book, and for anybody who's read it, they know a lot about you. We're definitely in an advantage in that way, so thank you. But one of my favorite things about it is your story, your journey about how you decided to join, and your, like you mentioned, how you got interested in aviation. Can you say a little bit more about that and your family for us, because it's really great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a fourth generation military family dating back to World War I. My great grandfather served in the Battle of Verdun in World War I. My grandfather served as a pilot. He started the aviation trend in our family. He flew in World War II on the aerial routes between Northern Africa and Europe, went on to be an airline pilot. And then my dad served in the 82nd Airborne, became a commercial pilot for Pan Am. And my mom's a civilian pilot. And so you could definitely say it's in my blood. I grew up around it, and I just loved it from a very, very early age. And so just like spent my childhood with my parents, like at small civilian airports and flying small planes like a Cessna 150, and learning aviation lingo. Like, I was the kid that knew all about airspeeds and altimeters when I was like a little kid. Like on the weekends, I would always fly with my dad. And then I ended up going to school, like the normal route. Then 9/11 happened, and that sort of centered my interest in aviation. And I grew up in a very patriotic family, very pro-military, pro-service. And so I was like, I think I want to look into this, and I want to do, like, if I'm going to do this, like, now is the time. And so I started looking into all of the aviation programs that all of the military had to find. Believe it or not, the Army was the last one I had an interest in, just because I wasn't familiar with the aviation program in the Army, but once I did my research, I found out that they had a program that I thought fit perfectly with me. But the big thing was that I would have to become a helicopter pilot, not a fixed wing pilot, which is what all of my experience and knowledge was in. I knew nothing about helicopters. I'd never been in one. And I was a little uncertain because I knew the commitment that came with joining the military. And I was like, shouldn't I make sure I even like helicopters before I pursue this? So the story's in my book, but I ended up going to an air show with my parents, and they paid $60 for me to have a 20-minute flight in an R-22 Robinson helicopter. And I still tell my parents today that it's like the best $60 they've ever spent on me, because when we landed, like I was just beaming, smiling ear to ear. I was so happy, and my decision was made. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to pursue aviation and helicopters in the Army.
I love that you were coming you were in the middle of college, right? You were at the University of Washington, is that right?
I was.
And that you were a competitive cheerleader?
So I was, yes. I was a cheerleader for the University of Washington. I actually got to cheer at the Rose Bowl in 2001. And then before that, I was a competitive gymnast, which is what led me into the cheerleading path once I was done with that.
It's so great because I think it defies it mixes up all kinds of gender stereotypes. And then, yeah, you just I'm sure those Army guys had no idea what to do with you when they saw you come in.
That's a true statement. It was very confusing for a lot of them.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because, I come from a military background, the Coast Guard, where women are 8% in aviation. And I'm guessing that in the Army, especially at the time that you joined, the percentage was even smaller than that. And I've also worked in joint environments, so I've had the opportunity to observe all of the different cultures. And so, how did that culture? How did you feel when you walked into that culture? How did you ingratiate yourself or not? I know you talk a little bit about it in the book, and I feel like you maybe have cherry picked some really, key examples of that experience, but I'd love to hear more about how did you get in there and function?
So it was eye-opening. I grew up with two sisters. I didn't have any brothers, and I went into a completely male-dominated work environment. And even as you said, female helicopter pilots were very rare. I then went on to fly the Kiowa Warrior helicopter, which is a light attack reconnaissance helicopter, and even less women flew that helicopter. And then I was a warrant officer. So I was there were very, very few of us.
You're a unicorn.
Very few of us. And so we all kind of stuck together. But it was eye-opening, I guess you could say. I knew it was going to be hard. I knew going into it that it was going to be a challenge. I don't think I knew how hard it was going to be. And I don't think I knew that some of the issues that I would face would have been the issues that I faced, I guess. I grew up with, I didn't know that some people would have an issue with me just because I was a woman in that job environment. I grew up with a dad that was very much who cares that you're a girl, go do whatever you want to do. If you want to fly, don't let being a woman be what prevents you from doing that. And so I grew up thinking that being a woman in a male dominated environment, okay, what's the big deal? That's just kind of how I viewed it growing up. So then when I actually got in it, I was like, what's the big deal? Why do people care? But a lot of them didn't. Whenever I talk about the issues that I did face, I always think that it's important that there were more, I would say, that thought it was cool that I was there and appreciated that I wanted to serve and that I loved aviation and was there to do the same job that they were. But there definitely were, especially more of like the older generation that wasn't used to women being in those positions. I faced a little bit of a challenge. And I would say one of the biggest difference was you always had to be on, if that makes any sense. You didn't get a chance, like you didn't have the flexibility to have a bad day. And so it was, if you failed at something, then it was a massive big deal. If a guy next to you failed at the exact same thing, people just brushed it off and moved on. But it was just because the spotlight was always on you, I think, because but not only was I a woman, I was a young woman. When I got to my unit, I was 22 years old. And like I said, I think it was quite confusing for some people about why I was there. And I think people wanted to test me and wanted to see if I could do my job the same way that they could. And so I always say it wasn't until I got back from Iraq that I felt like people really knew that I was there for the right reasons and that I could do it and they could count on me and trust me as a member of the team. Getting that acknowledgement didn't come easy. I had to earn it, that's for sure. But once I did, I was part of the team, and it was a great team to be on. But it did not come without its struggles. But sometimes things worth having are a lot of hard work.
Yeah, you're just like, I'm thinking back to so many incidents too for me. I was the same way. I was oblivious. I grew up wanting to be a pilot. I was encouraged. I was in positive environments. And I was enlisted for 5 years before I went to flight school. And honestly, like, nobody ever batted an eye. I was just someone who wanted to fly just like the guys were. And it wasn't until I got to flight school when I started to receive weird signals. It wasn't necessarily like, what are you doing here because you're a girl and you don't belong here. It was just the strangest tests, like you're talking about, and feeling also like you always have to be on. And if you fail, you've failed every woman who has ever done this or will ever come behind you. It felt like a lot of responsibility for me. And I wasn't even on the first wave,
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will confess that I was reading the book, and, you kind of very softly allude to feeling different in your early training. And I got to page 70 and I was like, okay, Amber, come on now. You can't be this easy. And then literally on page 71, you get into one of the scenarios where you were dealing with someone who sounded like he was an equal opportunity jerk. Wasn't just a jerk to women. But I'll be honest with you, I had a lot of things happen. And like you said, the majority of the people I worked with and dealt with were fabulous. It was just that like 10% that were, I called it static in my headset. But
I like it.
Nobody ever threatened to hit me. And I was like, wow.
Yeah. That was interesting. I was like, in the moment, was like, I don't feel like I've ever had to handle a situation like this before. But I mean, it was actually the fact that, my team and the guys that I was with stood up for me. It was just like it was like a win moment, even though it was, he was just freaking out. I don't know. It was really dumb, actually.
Yeah, it sounded like it. And I thought you handled it really well. Thanks. Reading your book, like how you handled that situation. And at the beginning of the year, we read A Chick in the Cockpit by Erica Armstrong, which is an airline book, but she had some crazy stuff happen to her and she handled it with humor. And I just was like reading your stories going, man, I wish I'd had like the wherewithal in those moments to to be witty enough to handle it like that. I just would internalize it and turn away. So if nothing else, reading the way you guys handle these situations is good instruction for
I feel like I did discover early on, if you like let them walk all over you, then they were going to walk all over you. And so I did learn that you have to stand up for yourself um and let them know that there is a line. And once people saw that the pushback and that I wasn't going to be a doormat, um things were better. People I think probably respected me a little bit more, and didn't push it quite as far.
Yeah, that can go so many ways too, right? Like you definitely, I can tell in your voice and in your reading that you've got a lot of spunk, and and I did too. And sometimes when you're fighting against that stuff, it can come on a little strong. So you always have to find like your place, right?
Yeah.
We
The
had
balance.
the balance of being professional and not thinking that everybody is constantly, everything is always about your gender or anything like that. You have to adjust your radar to the signals that you're receiving from people, because they, in those cultures, uh, I would say it's not hazing. Initiation is a normal part of it. And one of the things that I thought was so fun is that that you actually confessed to falling for
Rotor wash?
Did they call it rotor wash or prop wash?
Rotor wash.
Every little
They were
subculture has a thing.
they were so convincing. I'm not joking. Like they were all in on it and they were so convincing, but they like played it out in a way that it was like, it wasn't just like some off comment. It was like they explained it to me, and yeah, I totally fell for it.
It's so great. I had a conversation with an Army friend who is a tank cav officer about that story, and we have our stories too. And he was like, oh yeah, we used to tell the guys to go get an exhaust sample. And so if you saw a guy walking around with a garbage bag full of air, you knew what was going on.
Oh, I haven't heard that one. That's hilarious.
Oh, speaking of the Cav, I actually have another girlfriend who was a Kiowa pilot.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, she didn't serve in your units, but she gave me a little more detail on sort of the Cav initiations. And I love the story of the Stetson, breaking in the Stetson. It was really gross.
So gross. Yeah.
And you have yours, I'm assuming, somewhere.
I absolutely. I'll have it for the rest of my life, along with my spurs. So. Yes.
It's pretty great on you. I saw the picture in the book. It looks awesome. So,
Thank you.
Those are the fun things and some of the challenging things. But the other thing, obviously, that's in your face. You open the book with it. Is just the constant fear that you're dealing with, and I can't imagine that. So there are a lot of ways I can identify with your experience, and I did some flying in some challenging environments, but people weren't shooting at me, and those for me were like white knuckle moments, and you described them very cinematically, and I had a lot of people say that I saw a movie every time she started talking about those missions where you were going in to support.
Amazing feedback. I'm glad.
Yeah,
to hear that.
Really, really great descriptions. You talked about opening up, like writing your diary and opening up. As military officers, we repress our feelings, we put on our shell in front of everyone else, and we don't really talk about how we feel about things. And you did that in the book. How did you make choices about kind of how to express the emotional impact of, losing your friends, the fear of being a target when you were flying? Talk about that.
I would say in the moment, I didn't. I don't think I grasped the weight that you carry until a couple years after I got out of the military. You do have to operate at such a high level of stress in order to do your job and do it well, and to talk on 5 radios at once and listen and have, an enemy situation where you could be getting shot at. There's friendly forces on the ground where they're getting shot at, and you may have weather situations and hazards, and the terrain is, maybe you're flying in the middle of the night, so you have towers and wires. There's so much going on. And then I didn't even mention flying the aircraft. And so there's so much going on that you just have to constantly be operating at such a high level, that you kind of don't get to come down from that, because you have to be able to stay focused. If in the moment you're worrying about, am I going to make it home? Is this scary? You don't do any of that in the moment. All of that came for me afterwards. And on some of those stories that I tell in my book, you never feel it while you're out on the mission. You just don't. And I'm glad that you don't. Like, I'm glad the adrenaline is there. And even the adrenaline, you really have it in the beginning. As the deployment goes on, it kind of like calms down. You just almost get used to it. But you don't want to be having those thoughts in the moments, because then you're not an effective crew member. You're not making decisions if you're focusing on other things. And so I didn't reflect on those big picture until long after I got home, from specific instances in terms of firefights and stuff that was very close calls, you could say. You are kind of wired when you come back. Like, it takes you a minute to calm down. You don't go to sleep right afterwards. But I hate saying that you get used to it, but you get used to it. And it's kind of what you accept in terms of, like, this is your job, you know what is out there, and you have to ensure that, you're in the best mindset so you can make sure that you guys do come home in terms of the decisions that are being made.
Yeah, I can relate to those things, even, in a different context, for sure. I was surprised that you even were having the stress dream that you talked about. So clearly your subconscious was dealing with
Yes.
some of this stuff already. I never had those dreams while I was operational. It wasn't until I got out of the aircraft that I started having dreams about going in the drink, and how I was going to get out of the aircraft underwater, or flipped over at night, stuff we trained for all the time, but it's your mission, you train for it, you just do your best to assume that you can control what you can control, and you can't really internalize the other stuff. But then afterwards, I did.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that me having those reoccurring dreams was definitely my subconscious way of handling it. And those dreams were happening for me in Iraq. They didn't happen for me when I was in Afghanistan. I think it was almost it was brand new. And so I think in that aspect, some of it was much harder, because I had to accept a lot of what I was doing, what it all meant, and some of the possibilities and ways to handle it. When I got to Afghanistan, I was a combat veteran. I'd done it before. So it was not as brand new and unknown. And I think the unknown is often some of the hardest to deal with, or the scariest things. And so that's probably what helped me more in Afghanistan, was just the experience that I had had from a previous war.
Yeah, I can see that. So what was your favorite thing about flying a helicopter? And do you miss it?
I loved the Kiowa Warrior. I loved getting to shoot a machine gun and rockets from a helicopter is, like, how many people get to say that they have done that? And the journey of starting out and studying so hard and learning so much, and just like every day have that be your sole focus in life, is to learn this and get better every single day. and then working your way up with all of the other, the military or the Army dynamic, aviation, and then big Army. So just really like working nonstop, and then just getting to be, I don't even want to say proficient, but you are, it's almost like driving a car for you. Like you've done it so much, and it's so, you're in your groove and you're good at it and you're used to it, and you're like a working machine with your co-pilot, and it's just a good feeling to be able to do that. Like I loved flying the helicopter, but I will say that my absolute favorite part of it was who our customers were. And that was the ground force. We went out every day in combat and we supported them, and, hopefully made their day. Just if we just made it a tiny bit easier on them, then that's success, is to be able to help them in any way we can, whether it's in an enemy firefight, whether it's looking for something in the mountains, whether it's clearing a road of IEDs, whatever we can do to make it safer for them so they get to go home and back to their families. That was the best part of the job.
And I am certain that they have tremendous respect and appreciation for you for that. And that came through in the book too, when you were talking about how you felt about supporting them, for sure.
Yeah.
The thing that you were saying too about being proficient at something, it feels really good to when you master something that you've had to work so hard to be good at. So that is a really satisfying feeling.
That was hard to walk away from because, I'd spent almost 8 years of my life on this, one thing. And I knew the hard work that it took to get me to the point where I ended up getting out of the military. And so that was a challenge, but
yeah, you don't talk about that in the book. Can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to get out? What in the timing?
So I joined the military to serve my country and to fly. Those were the two reasons that I joined the military. And I felt, so in aviation, your commitment is much longer than if you go in for another job in the military. Mine is 6 years after you graduate from flight school. So it ended up being, over 7.5 years for me. And so I hadn't ever thought about making the military a career. And it's a hard lifestyle. It's a challenging, hard lifestyle. And I felt that when I served for almost 8 years, I'd done 2 wars, and I felt like I had helped, and I had done what I set out to do when I joined the military. And so I was just ready for my next chapter in life and to see what else was out there in the civilian world. And I had spent, most of my 20s, like you're off deployment schedule. And so I made the decision. It was a very challenging one that I struggled with. My unit was going back to Afghanistan. This time they were going down to Kandahar. So it was a decision that I struggled with because my unit was going back to war, and I didn't, that's not an easy decision to make under those circumstances. But that ultimately is why I decided to get out.
And then what did you do? What do you do now?
So when I got out of the military, I was kind of faced with, what do I want to do now? And like I said, I got out because I wanted to see what else was out there in the civilian world. I'd done the military aviation, and I felt like I had 2 paths when I got out. I could take the easy route, which would be becoming a helicopter pilot, getting a job. And that's actually a path that I pursued in terms of a job. It was where my comfort lied. And obviously I liked flying a helicopter, but I also had in my mind, I was like, I don't know if I want to get out and do like get out of the military go to all this work to get out of the military and then do like a less cooler version of the job that I was doing in the military. And
Oh
so
man, you just put that so well for me. Like, okay, no offense to everybody
no offense.
no offense, everybody, but I think you just put into words a feeling that I've had about not wanting to do that for a living.
Yeah. And so I then, my other path was to get outside of my comfort zone. And for me, that was doing something completely different that I was completely uncomfortable with, which was going to grad school. I thought that that would possibly be a good transition path in terms of helping me figure out what I wanted to do. And, but I didn't want to do it because I hated writing. I hated putting myself out there. I was uncomfortable with it. And I knew that grad school would be 2 straight years of writing. And so the job that I had applied for with the helicopter position, it was a city, like a government job. And so it was taking forever, but like they got my uniform measurements and I did the entire process with them, but it was taking so long that in the meantime, I had decided to apply to grad school. And I ended up getting selected for grad school. And so I was like, all right, let's do this. And I was right. It was 2 years of writing. And turns out that I absolutely loved it. And I realized that I wasn't bad at writing, which I always assumed I was. I just was scared of it because I'd never forced myself to really do it, which eventually led to me having, I guess, the confidence to be able to write a book by myself, which I will admit was like a little panic when I realized like, oh my gosh, I now just committed to writing a book about my life. And that's a little nerve-wracking in the beginning. But yeah, so from there, from grad school, I worked with a veteran advocacy organization that allowed me to be a spokesperson and be in the media and write articles and really deliver strategic messaging, and also was able to write my book, and which then moved on to do other things. I worked at the Pentagon as the deputy assistant to the Secretary of Defense when Secretary Mattis was the Secretary of Defense. And yeah, and now I get to advise and consult companies and businesses and CEOs and people on communications and leadership and the national security and foreign policy world.
And it's awesome. I'm so impressed with that.
Oh, thank you so much.
You know, I have a little bit
enjoy
of
it.
Foreign policy. That's great. I'm so impressed and so much respect for you. And I love how putting yourself outside that comfort zone was the thing that gave you the confidence to do those things. And you're also not just consulting with companies, you're consulting with children right now. There's somebody in the background. Somebody's awake.
Yes, my baby just woke up.
Do you need to go handle that? You need to take a break?
I probably have a few more minutes,
Okay.
and then I'll need to go check on him. Yeah.
Okay.
I've got the monitor right here, so I'm looking at it.
I know. I could see you looking down. I was like, oh no, something's going down there. That's awesome. Tell me about your family. You have kids now.
I do. So my husband is a helicopter pilot as well, but we did not meet until I was out of the military. He actually flew the same helicopter that I did. And we knew some of the same people, but we never met while I was still in the military.
Oh, how funny.
And yes, we have 2 kids. We have a baby boy and a girl who's 2.5, and a bulldog.
What's your bulldog?
Was our first child, yes. And fittingly, our bulldog's name is Kiowa.
Of course. That's so great. Well, I am just so impressed with everything. Everyone's name for you. It's just, I think you may have even referred to yourself as it, but badass, period. Stop, like full stop, badass.
I don't think I described myself like that.
Well, that's what we read when we read your book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
A lot of gumption, a lot of courage, a lot of spunk for sure. And I'm really grateful for your time in talking about.
Of course, I'm so happy to do it.
your sisters served too at the same time. That is just impressive. What an amazing family.
I actually got to see both of my sisters in Afghanistan. My younger sister was a Black Hawk pilot, and her combat aviation brigade took over for my brigade, and so we like went like this, got to high five in Afghanistan. And then my other sister Kelly, she's a C-130 pilot in the Air National Guard, and she was actually deployed for a couple of months, and I got to see her while she was in country as well. So yep, this big flying family, we all got to do it.
It's so impressive. I don't know how your parents dealt with that. And I wanted to say, like, I opened the book up again today because I was looking at different quotes and stuff, and I cannot read the last 3 lines without crying. Where you, and since you haven't read the book in a while, I will remind you, it is when you're on the aircraft coming back to the States and the pilot announces that you've entered, I'm going to cry just saying it, that you've entered US airspace, period. Like, that is so moving. I was so relieved. Your parents must have been so relieved when you all came home.
Oh, thank you so much. It was surreal because it was just absolutely surreal to hear that, and like the relief that came with it, knowing that you're back inside the most like amazing place on earth after the experiences that we have had.
Thanks so much for listening. Please join us in the Aviatrix Book Club and on the Aviatrix Book Review podcast next month, when we'll discuss the book Postcards from the Sky, Adventures of an Aviatrix by Erin Seidemann.
And we are